Hello and welcome to Anya Hindmarch. You know her as the handbag lady, of course, the very posh handbags and the very posh plastic bags as well. I'm not a plastic, the very posh, not plastic bags, but not just posh, but also very useful. But we are talking to her here today as the author of this wonderful new book, If in Doubt, Wash Your Hair, which I have now realized I'm going to adopt as my mantra. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast, Anya. It's such a pleasure. Um, uh,
Thank
let's
you
talk
so much
about
for having me.
let's talk about this whole idea of embracing your age. As a culture, women have been told for so long that you've got to be youthful, you've got to be sort of nubile, you've got to be desirable, and it's all sort of tied into this idea of youth. And I love that you've sort of just shattered that and said that it's so wonderful to actually be 50.
I think it is. I mean, and I don't think it's even about, the new 50 is the new 40. I think we just need to accept that actually the more we know about ourselves, I
Exactly.
think the happier and easier life gets. Actually, you kind of realize who you want to be friends with and what really matters to you. And in fact, I'm not sure I'd want to go back to being 18, actually. I think it's sort of almost nicer where I am now.
But also that I suppose in spirit we all are 18, till we die, really. It's just that maybe on the outside we seem to change. But I think there's a certain part of us that will always remain 18.
It's true, actually, and in some ways, I always think that you feel exactly the same
Yeah,
as you get older. I don't feel what I mean, apart from perhaps certain things I know about myself more, and there's experience clearly, but actually, you don't feel old. I think is the point as you get older. You feel exactly the same. Sometimes I look in the mirror and it's a bit of a surprise because in my head I think I am still quite young, and I have this weird thing actually when sometimes I'm waking up in the morning and you're just coming into consciousness, and I'm like, I like my life and I quite like my children, and I'm sort of coming to, and I'm like, and I'm 33, and I go, I'm 53. I realize like time has just sort of sped forward. So it's funny, is that's obviously where my deep sort of subconscious, that's where I think I still sit 33.
yeah, I think that's a lovely age. It's also the age at which Christ died. That's a bit alarming. So maybe, it's subconsciously something to do with religion and faith and all that we're taught. But Anya, let's also talk about this idea of doubt. The one word that sticks out to me in the title of your book is doubt, because that's again something we've been told that we have to fight. We have to be confident, we have to, be out there, we have to lean in, we have to have it all, do it all. But sometimes you don't know it all, and isn't it okay to say that?
100%. I actually think we need to rethink the word doubt,
Yeah,
because I think that we think of doubt as a bad thing, and I think that only certain people have, and it's not true. Everyone has doubt. It's part of who we are. Everyone from the prime ministers to the presidents, everyone has doubt. And actually, doubt is a good thing. Doubt keeps you safe. Doubt keeps you in check. So doubt is our friend, actually. And I think we need to take away this fear of the word doubt and this feel of shame of feeling doubt. We should be actually grateful for doubt and realize that everyone has it. And I think for me, this book is really a book about doubt. It's about being honest about doubt, hopefully reframing doubt, and being honest about the doubt that I've suffered, and how I've sort of come through some of it, and just sort of sharing with almost as if written to as a mother to a daughter, or to from a friend to a friend.
yeah, and that's one of the things that a lot of young women come up to you, or they certainly say come up to say women who are successful, and say, how did you do it, can you tell us? And sometimes we make it seem all too easy for them, and then when they're going through their journey they realize, my god, it's very tough. We need to be more open about our struggles, don't you think?
100%. And actually, that literally sums up why I wrote this book,
Yeah,
because I do lots of talks to women, women in business, women in fashion, women in finance, women juggling careers and families, and all flavors of all types of women. And they always often at the end of the talk will come up to me and say, what's your best bit of advice? And I would always say, if in doubt, wash your hair, because it talks about doubt and it's honest about doubt, because actually it also talks about the fact that if we need to look after ourselves too,
yeah,
because life is, we need to be as kind to ourselves as we would to to our children and our friends. And I just think that actually we need to open up and be more honest with each other, because the more we share and are open, then hopefully if it helps one other person, that's made a difference. So that was literally the reason for the book.
Right. But that culture that sort of prevents us from sharing, prevents us from being our authentic selves, especially for someone like you who's so public. Talk a little about that culture, because there's a lot of shaming involved in that. We've just seen things like, the kind of bullying that happens to celebrities, which is terrible because they're just, some of them are just living their authentic lives. And, we think that it's all a bizarre kind of national sport. So
Yeah. Well,
that's
I
really
think that celebrity bullying is awful. I don't see myself as a celebrity, luckily, but I think that we need to care a bit less, truthfully. I mean, I don't really care what people might say about me because I'm happy with who I am, and I think that sometimes people will always write strange things. I think that we need to be more honest about the struggles, because I think actually just pretending, as you said earlier, everything is okay is not really
Mhm,
doing anyone any favors.
mhm.
And actually, I think it's a really cool thing to open up and talk about things that you're nervous of or scared of, or that fill you with doubt. I think it's great to be in a way confident enough to sort of say these are the things I've struggled with. I think perhaps there's an element of it perhaps having been more of a man's world,
Yeah.
that the sense of showing any sort of vulnerability seemed to be a weakness. And
Yeah.
actually, I think it's a strength. I remember once someone saying to me in a slightly kind of sort of, not aggressive, too strong a word, but a slightly sort of mildly aggressive tone, Anya, you must take the emotion out of this.
Hmm.
And it was a man talking to me about something that actually had been really unfair and that I had called that person on. And they said, take the emotion out. And I remember thinking, no, I'm never going to take the emotion
Right.
out, because that's what we do really well. That's what we bring to the table. And a business without emotion, or a family without emotion, is empty. That doesn't work. That's what businesses and families are built on. So I actually think we need to embrace our sort of deemed weaknesses,
Yeah.
and actually be really front foot with them and say, no, this is what we're really good at. And for me, doubt is also something that actually is not a weakness. It's really cool to stand up and say, this is what's made me feel full of doubt, but this is how I got through it. Everyone has doubt. It's completely fine.
Absolutely. And when you look at the next generation, when you look at your children, when you look at younger women, what is it that strikes you? You've talked about the fact that they're living far more sustainable lives, and they're also far more aware of their mental health, which is excellent. What are the things that you think we could learn from them?
Um, Well, I think that the difference is not so much we can learn. I come to that, but I think the difference between the generations is that also I think we've been the transition generation. So
Yeah,
to a certain extent, I can speak for me. I am now working as hard as my father, whilst in my head trying to live up to my mother's role and expectations and example.
absolutely.
And in some ways, that's a very hard place to be, because, of course, you can't do both. And I've struggled with that a bit. But came to the realization, I've come to the realization that, of course, that's going to be hard. So what's happening, I see in my kids' generation, is the fact they are dividing the household tasks, the children, between the lines are being redrawn. And actually, therefore, it's unrealistic to expect, me to work as hard as I am and all the thank you letters and all the things at home. That's not realistic. So I see in my kids that they're actually, they're much more flexible with their partners. So I think that's changing. So I think they're good at that. I think that's one thing that they're really, making a difference on. I think absolutely environmentally, that's really important. And they are they're brilliant spokespeople and passionate believers, and quite right too, to be, fighting to make the change we need to save. We have 10 years to sort this planet out. I mean, it's
Yeah,
terrifying.
yeah,
And so that they are, I think, of driving often an older generation who've been a bit sort of slow possibly. So I think the younger generation is quite brilliant. I think they've been very open about mental health, but I do think, though, that experience counts. And I think that, I mean, I've looked at the generation that's older than me during COVID and seen the stoicism of that generation. The fact that they don't expect life to be perfect. They don't actually expect everything to go their way. And I think in some ways I've certainly learnt from them that lack of expectation, and the sense that it just should be absolutely 100% perfect. It's unrealistic and makes everyone unhappy. So I think that there's things to be learned from the younger generation, and for me from the older generation as well. And I think we just all need to have these debates and discuss it all. I mean, there's so much to discuss around those subjects.
Absolutely. And making men part of the debate as well, not sort of
Oh
keeping them out,
yes,
right?
this is this is
That's
this is
absolutely important.
100%. This is not, I mean, I'm, by the way, I'm the biggest fan of men in the workplace as husbands. I mean, I love men. And I often also have a lot of what I would call masculine girlfriends and feminine boyfriends. And actually, I think that, gender is such an interesting topic in itself. So this is not about,
And
the
sorry,
sex.
sorry to interrupt, but also the way the new generation is embracing gender. They're far more fluid and flexible with the idea of gender.
I think they've absolutely changed the debate on so many things. Diversity is so important, gender so important, acceptance, inclusion. Things that are really basic for people's happiness actually.
Right.
And they've forced those issues, and sometimes it's been quite uncomfortable to be forced in that way, because certainly the older generation can be quite set in its ways, and its change is hard and uncomfortable. So no, it's really exciting in many ways what's going on now. And of course, sometimes in some subjects the pendulum can overswing and it can get a bit too much, but that's the nature of change. Sometimes it does that. So I think these are exciting times actually, and I think that people are more open. But I think we also can, and it's important to keep experience in this conversation, and to a certain extent that sort of stoicism, what we learned from those generations who've had to just put up with things and not always expect to have everything going their way. There's some really interesting things to learn from that too. I don't think we should expect to be perfectly happy all the time. That's going to make for many very unrealistic and unhappy people.
Absolutely. I think the post-war generation, all over the world, in our country, it was the post-independence generation. In your country, it was the post-war generation. They'd seen everything shattered and they had to really rebuild from nothing. So I think that idea that you could live with much less was something that was ingrained in their DNA. And I think that's something we have to recapture, because if COVID has taught us anything, it is that we need to learn to live with less. And that's
Uh,
very much part of your design philosophy as well. Talk a little about that.
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And just to say to that, I think COVID has been hideous. I mean, there's nothing good that's come out of it, apart from where you can claim silver linings. I think the sense of community and the sense of in a way, localization, local communities, not globalization at the expense of everything is super, super important. But I think, though, that in my work, I'm passionate about using fashion as a sort of a platform, if you like, for change, but for hopefully productive and healthy change. That might be on the subject of environmental materials. It might be on the subject of just raising the debate. It might be about bags that work, that make a difference. I mean, I think fashion with purpose is my sort of favorite phrase, because that could mean that actually something just makes you feel great. That's a purpose. That's also what fashion does really well. But it also could be that actually it's donating to something, or it's using up materials that would have otherwise gone into landfill, or that it's actually trialing a new way of working that has a different water consumption, or employs collectives in a charitable way of women, or whatever it might be. And I think that's exciting, because fashion is a very important industry. Actually, it employs so many people, and
Right.
I know it seems like a frilly industry, and perhaps an unnecessary industry, and that with the challenges we have for the planet. But we mustn't forget the amount of employment it produces, and the amount of, in a way, empowerment it delivers. And I think that we need to work out how we can make sure that we correct our behavior to overconsumption, but without damaging people's jobs, because that would be very counterproductive, I think, to the environment, because it would sink down everyone's agenda. So actually, I think we need to all think about behaving a bit more like our grandparents did, which is that, we wouldn't buy 10 t-shirts a year, we'd buy five, and we'd buy five and we'd mend them, and we'd buy better quality t-shirts, better source t-shirts. We would make do and mend. We would, waste not, want not. The word disposable was
Mm.
not part of their agenda. They would wash things up and reuse things and boil
Absolutely.
things.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a big project in lockdown with the National Health Service, and well, big project for me, where we were trying to find hospital gowns, so PPE, and we managed to make them, and we managed to make 6,500 gowns. for 2 hospitals in London, but we made them out of fabric that could be borrowed, like old-fashioned nurses' uniforms,
Wow.
not this paper that has to be. I mean, the problem with PPE that's made of paper and plastic is that it has to be burnt because it's contaminated. So
Yeah. Right.
it's so damaging. And
Right.
clearly, we had to do it at that point. But a better way is to make reusable gowns that can be washed on the premises and boiled to a temperature for infection control. But there's different ways of doing things. So we need to, really rethink the way we achieve, good results, I think.
I love the way you're repurposing fashion to our very critical times, and especially around COVID. And that's something that we needed to do in India as well. We ran out of PPE gowns very quickly, and then we had to sort of, get them made in Coimbatore. We had to get them stitched. So a lot of things came up during that time, out of necessity. But are there certain lessons for fashion in that period, in this period, which you think are permanent ones? One is, of course, like
Yeah,
fast fashion should just disappear off the face of the earth.
yeah. I think, I mean, there's so many. I mean, interestingly, fast fashion rightly gets a sort of bum rap. Interestingly, a lot of those very big groups have a huge sourcing power because they can say
Yeah,
to their suppliers, we want, fabric that's made in this way, this responsible, sustainable way. And their suppliers will listen and bend over backwards because
right.
otherwise they won't get the orders, and the orders are huge. They have a huge power and they can do a huge amount of good. Many of them, by the way, are doing loads of good actually, and driven, of course, by consumers demanding it, which is super exciting. So that I think is key. I think one of the things that is also interesting is the keeping the ability to manufacture locally.
Hmm.
And that's what India has in spades. I mean, it is, it's so the talent that
Hmm.
comes out of India. We do some of our embroidery in India. I mean, oh my God, just the skills.
Extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And they are my heroes, those craftsmen. And keeping those skills is so important. And interestingly, in the UK, I think what happened is the sort of skills were sucked out to, to a certain extent into countries with less high wage systems.
Right.
And we lost those skills. And actually, now if you look towards a future where perhaps people are prepared to pay a bit more for things that last, we need to rebuild those skills up because you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable if you can't make things and look after yourselves locally. I think this movement towards this localization is not in every sense, but is just in some senses that more local supply chains make sense from simply from a carbon footprint point of view.
Right.
Um, so perhaps the idea of each country being specialists and
Yeah.
no one country being sustainable on its own is you suddenly feel a
Wonderful.
bit vulnerable.
But that's so. Do you what are you advocating, that each country sort of work on its domain specialization, or does it do the whole thing?
Well, I think it's interesting in times of crisis like war or COVID. I needed to find in the UK to make those gowns, and I know
Right.
that's not my business, but it was what I was doing at the time. I needed to find local fabric and I needed to find local manufacturers, and it was really exciting running around London trying to find people who could make things and trying to find fabric. And it made me realise that we've lost a lot of that. I mean, you haven't in India, but we've lost a lot of that, and that's a great sadness actually, because it means if we do need to kind of become more local to be moving stuff around less from a sort of carbon perspective, then actually we need those skills. And I wonder if people are prepared to pay a bit more, to my t-shirt analogy of buying less but buying better, then maybe we can afford the wage cost in the UK, and actually can rethink how we make things. So there's so much interesting stuff that's, I think, sort of coming up and
Right.
coming out of this
Yeah, and a
situation.
lot of reskilling needs to be done as well. We certainly need to do it in India, but I wonder whether it needs to be done in the West as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, take retail, which is an industry that's been particularly hard hit with the, if you like, the sort of the digital revolution,
Yeah.
really. It's absolutely going to be imperative that people who've worked in retail, and there's been a huge number of jobs lost in
Right.
retail specifically, are rethinking what their skills are. So, but skills are very transferable, and if people need to reskill, they
We
will. It's
will.
amazing how fast they will.
Oh yeah.
If that's about putting food on your table, you reskill. So I think that these are shifting times, but there's going to be some quite exciting things that come out of it, some quite necessary things that come out of it, I think probably, and I think that we must always embrace business that drives the economy, that drives in turn things that support our hospitals and all the public services that we have. So I don't know, I'm still quite positive despite it all.
No, and I can see why, because I mean, when you did that, I'm not a plastic bag. I mean, who would have thought that it would have really touched a chord with everyone? But it did, didn't it? So there was something in society which knew what the coming crisis was going to be, and you somehow had tapped into that. So there is that sense that, possibly you knew what was coming.
Well, it's interesting. Another sort of a different example, but a similar one is people aren't stupid, are they? I mean, people understand. That everyone understands the challenges, and I think that if you treat people in a stupid way, they behave stupidly. Do you know what I mean? Governments need to respect the people that incredibly smart. We want to do the right thing. That's nature's way mostly. And one example of that, which was interesting to me and in my world, was that during the COVID period, I kind of realized that fashion's become crazy. We because in a way the retail threat was harming a lot of retailers. They were bringing what would traditionally be the January sales, the discount period, from January but into December, so they could actually match their increase their like for likes, sort of falsely really, and so they're bringing that lump of selling and sales into the previous year. And then that crept actually even further back into November because of Black Friday. So we ended up retailers going on sale in November at a time when there's a huge buying power, of course, in November and December through Christmas and all the holiday festivals. And so actually then retailers were sort of shooting themselves in the foot because they were having a margin sort of slash time during the biggest and most important time. So actually during COVID, one of the things I've been really passionate about is actually saying, if we're going to reset timetables, it's now. Now's a perfect moment
Right.
to take stock and to
Right.
change. So we actually said we're not going on sale in November, which all our suppliers, all of our big partners were, of course, in this cycle. And we said, if we're changing, we're going to go back to the traditional calendar. Because, of course, if you start going on sale in November, as was happening, then delivering in September the new winter stock was only 2 months on the shop floor. So it meant then people were delivering winter in May rather than in September, which meant that all the seasons were wrong. So therefore, we decided it was important to change. It was a good moment. And actually on Black Friday, because we felt we'd moved away from discounting with our partners, we actually put out a message to say that for every sale on Black Friday that we made, we would donate all the profits to an environmental charity as part of our, we must work against this kind of crazy destruction of the industry. And we had more sales that weekend than almost any other weekend. So people do care, they really do.
Yeah.
And actually that's quite reassuring that they're not just after the cheapest deal or
Right.
things for less. Actually they have a sense of purpose and a sense of responsibility. So I think we need to trust in that and just communicate what we're doing really well and try and encourage people to behave in a way that makes sense, really.
Wonderful. But we also need to wash our hair.
Always, because we have a lot of doubt, right?
But Anya, that's the thing about women. When you say something like this or when you do something like this, it's always considered frivolous. Whereas if a man talks about his hair or his dog or his suit, it's considered very manly and very masculine. But
Yeah, but we've got to, yeah.
there's always this thing about women, not being taken seriously. Doesn't that get you sometimes?
You know what? Funny enough, there have of course been times when I've just thought, but actually, no, I don't, because I'm sort of now confident. I think us women are getting more confident to know that we have a place in this world.
Yeah.
We have a voice. We contribute loads. Listen, we bring up families. We've raised families, which is much the most complicated thing to do. Much more complicated than running a business. Jesus, it takes any entrepreneurial skills and diplomacy skills and management skills and logistics skills. I mean, it's
You
everything
have
combined.
five. I don't know how you do it. I have two. I can barely stand. How do
Well,
you
I do it really badly. I do it really badly, and they mostly bring up themselves. But the point is, though, we're good as women. We must just the more we believe in ourselves and actually communicate the kind of confidence that I think we do feel internally, we know what we're about. So I actually think that it's great to talk about if in doubt wash our hair, because what we're really talking about is an underlying and important sense of looking after ourselves and actually empowering ourselves to feel good and be the best versions of ourselves. We're talking about confidence. We're talking about putting on our own oxygen mask first and the responsibility we have to look after ourselves to support our networks and families. So these are all important topics. So sometimes we talk about them in a frivolous way, and I'm happy with that. But perhaps sometimes we need to rephrase them and actually the underlying important message to make them sound less frivolous. I don't know. I don't really care. But I don't think we are frivolous. I think we're frankly the rock underneath most men's lives, probably.
Yeah, and we're not frivolous. We're just funny and feisty, and and we like to be funny and feisty. Why not? There's
And
far
hopefully
too much.
self-deprecating as well.
Yeah,
Women are very
yeah,
good at being self-deprecating, you know.
absolutely. And sometimes, of course, it's taken as a sign of weakness. But there's enough sadness out there. I think we can contribute a little humor, and I love that about your book as well. That really taps into that sense of humor, which I think all of us women in a way have developed, because otherwise the only other option is to cry all the time.
I think it's self-preservation, isn't it? So right. But I think humor goes a long way. You know, it's a lightness of touch which can sometimes divert some quite or nudge along some quite complicated conversations. You know, I
Yeah,
think humor is so important. Certainly I find that in the workplace, and certainly I find that at home. And by the way, I'm not man bashing at all, because I love the men I work with, the man I'm married to, and I love
yeah,
my 4 sons, you know, so this is not man bashing. It's interesting. It's just a slight sort of redistribution of perhaps our places in the world a little
yeah.
bit, and perhaps I think a bit of an appreciation for what women bring to the table. But I'm the biggest fan of men, so know that loud and clear.
No, no, of course. And I think the whole idea that feminism is man bashing is long dead. I think people do understand that you can be a feminist and you can love men as well. Why not?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they're as important. Of course, they need to be raised. Uh, Raised a little, they need to be groomed a little, they need to learn certain behaviors, and I think we're very good at that, aren't we?
Yeah, I do. I think we're pretty great, really.
Okay, now that we've settled that, let's go ahead and change the world and wash our hair while we do that. Thank you so much, Anya
Oh,
Hindmarch.
what a great
What a,
pleasure.
what a pleasure it was to talk to you, and more power to all the work that you do. Thank you very
Oh, well, I'd love to meet you one day when I come to India, please.
much. Certainly, we'll do that. We'll set it up. Bye bye.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.